All right, everyone, let's be honest. Taxes, not exactly the most exciting topic, right? Up there with flossing, maybe.
Yeah, I hear you.
But we're diving deep today into the IRS's new inflation adjustments for the 2025 tax year.
Buckle up.
Exactly. It's all right here in this IRS announcement. IRS releases tax inflation adjustments for tax year 2025, straight from their website. Don't worry, we'll make sure you've got that link.
Yes, you definitely want to check that out. I mean,
Mhm.
maybe not right now, but
When you're in the mood for a little light reading.
exactly.
So we're not going to make you tax experts or anything, but we want to highlight what's changed, what stayed the same, and really what might matter to you.
Because buried in all this official language,
Mm.
there are clues about how much money,
Yeah.
you might owe
Or get back.
or get back. That's the good part.
Okay, let's start with the good stuff.
Yeah.
Standard deductions, they're going up.
Yes.
Single filers get an extra $400. Married couple filing jointly get $800. Heads of households, $600.
Nice little boost.
It is. So what does this mean for the average person?
Well, it might change whether you itemize or just take the standard deduction.
Hmm.
The higher standard deduction might actually be the better move for a lot of people.
So even if these numbers seem small,
They can make a difference.
yeah, absolutely. Now, onto the marginal tax brackets.
Yes.
Those are also adjusted for inflation, so that's how much tax you pay on different parts of your income.
Right. So let's say you're single and making $70,000 a year. This year, you could actually end up paying a bit less in taxes than you did last year.
So it's not just about the tax rates,
No,
but where those rates kick in.
exactly. It's all about where you fall on that scale.
Interesting. Okay, so what about the alternative minimum tax, the AMP?
Oh, the AMT. The exemption for that is going up, which
Mhm.
is good news for anyone who might be subject to that tax.
Which I feel like is a lot of people.
Well, can be confusing. But basically, a higher exemption means fewer people will probably have to deal with the AMT.
Gotcha. So less chance of getting caught in that net. Now, for families, the earned income tax credit is going up, which is great news for working families with lower incomes, especially those with 3 or more kids.
This credit can make a huge difference for families who qualify. It's designed to really reduce their tax burden.
Like a helping hand.
Exactly.
Okay, so pre-tax benefits? Any changes there?
Definitely.
Yeah.
The monthly limit for pre-tax transportation benefits is going up to $325. So you can set aside more money from your paycheck before taxes to cover things like your commute.
Oh, I use that for my train pass.
There you go.
Every dollar counts.
It really does.
Yeah.
And speaking of healthcare, there's some adjustments to the Health Flexible Spending Account, or FSA.
Right, the FSA.
Yes. The contribution limit there is going up to $3,300. So if you've got medical expenses coming up, this is a great way to save some money.
Smart. Okay, but what about HSA's health savings accounts? Aren't those similar?
They are, but there are some key differences. HSAs work with those high-deductible health plans. And the good news is, both deductibles and out-of-pocket maximums for HSAs are being adjusted.
So it sounds like higher contributions,
Potentially?
but also a higher deductible before your coverage actually kicks in.
Right. It's a trade-off. You really need to think about your own healthcare needs and your financial situation when you're deciding between an FSA and an HSA.
No one size fits all.
Exactly.
Before we move on, any other quick changes we should mention for people who are traveling abroad or maybe dealing with estate planning?
Yeah, definitely. The foreign earned income exclusion is going up to $130,000. So that's great news for Americans earning income in other countries. And for estate planning, the estate tax exclusion is increasing to $13,990,000. That's the amount you can pass on to your heirs without having to pay federal estate taxes.
Got it. So more money staying with families,
Exactly.
less going to Uncle Sam.
Right. And speaking of giving money away, the annual gift tax exclusion is going up to $19,000. That's how much you can give someone as a gift without having to worry about gift taxes.
Very generous. What
Yeah.
about adoption? Any changes there?
Yeah, adoption credits are going out too. The maximum credit for a child with special needs is increasing to $17,280.
Oh, wow. That's great. That can really make a difference.
It really can. Adoption can be expensive.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've covered a lot of changes, but are there any things staying the same?
You'd think with all these adjustments, everything would change. But some things are holding steady. Personal exemptions are still at zero, which goes back to the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act.
Right, that was a big one.
Yeah.
So instead of claiming those personal exemptions for yourself and your dependents, you're basically getting a larger standard deduction to make up for it.
Exactly. And there's still no limit on itemized deductions for
Yeah.
2025. So if you've got a lot of eligible expenses, like mortgage interest or charitable contributions, you can deduct those freely.
Good to know. Now, what about the lifetime learning credit? Any changes there?
The income thresholds for that credit haven't changed, so it's still a great way to offset the cost of college or other education expenses. But it does start phasing out for single filers making over $80,000.
Okay, so valuable credit, but with some income limitations.
Right.
Okay. So we've talked about the nuts and bolts of all these changes, but what really jumped out at you in this announcement? What surprised you?
What really stood out to me is the continued increase in the 401k and IRA contribution limits. For 2025, they're going up to $23,500 for 401ks and $7,500 for IRAs. That's a pretty big jump.
Wow, those are big numbers. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it shows just how important saving for retirement is, especially since people are living longer and facing potentially higher healthcare costs in the future. It's like the government is saying, hey, you need to be prepared.
Makes sense. Especially with inflation still a concern.
Exactly. And those higher contribution limits give people the chance to save more money and potentially see their savings grow faster over time.
So it's a win-win. You reduce your taxable income now and build a more secure future for yourself.
I like the way you put that, a win-win.
And don't forget about those tax credits for making your home more energy efficient. Those are still around for 2025.
Oh, right. I almost forgot about those. Those are a great way to save money and be more eco-friendly at the same time.
Absolutely. So with all these changes and adjustments and things staying the same, it can feel a little overwhelming. What advice would you give our listeners to help them navigate all this tax information?
Well, don't try to take it all in at once. Start by focusing on the changes that directly affect you. Are you single? Married? A homeowner? A parent? Figure out what matters most to your situation.
Personalize it.
Exactly. And remember, you don't have to figure this all out on your own. There are tons of resources available to help you, from the IRS website to the tax software programs.
And if you're really feeling lost,
don't be afraid to ask for help.
yeah, get a professional in your corner.
Sometimes that's the best way to make sure you're taking advantage of all the deductions and credits that are available to you.
Okay, so we've talked about the specific tax changes and how to approach them, but let's zoom out for a minute. What do these adjustments tell us about the bigger picture, about the economy and the government's priorities?
That's a good question. Well, I think they reflect a few key things. First, we're still dealing with inflation, so it makes sense that many of these figures are adjusted upward to keep pace with rising costs.
Right. If everything else is getting more expensive, those tax thresholds and limits can't just stay the same.
Exactly. And second, the focus on retirement savings, with those increased 401k and IRA limits, really shows how important long-term financial planning is these days.
Like they're encouraging us to be proactive.
Exactly. And lastly, I think these adjustments, especially the ones related to energy efficiency and adoption, give us a peek into some of the government's policy priorities. They're encouraging behaviors that are generally seen as good for society and the environment.
Interesting. So it's not just about the numbers themselves,
Well,
but the messages behind those numbers.
right. It's about using tax policy to incentivize positive change.
Fascinating. So from your expert perspective, is there anything in these adjustments that really surprised you or caught your eye?
One thing that stood out to me is that the child tax credit, which was expanded during the pandemic, has gone back to its pre-pandemic level. Which, makes sense. It was a temporary measure, but it was a big deal at the time. It provided a lot of support to families with children.
It was a lifeline for a lot of people.
It really was. And even though we knew it would expire eventually, it does bring up that ongoing conversation about the best ways to support families and address child poverty. It's a complex issue for sure.
It is, and it'll be interesting to see how those conversations continue to unfold.
Yeah.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, but we've really just scratched the surface of the tax world. There's so much more to explore.
Definitely. We encourage everyone to do their own research, read the IRS announcement, check out some reputable tax websites,
Yeah.
or even talk to a tax professional.
The more you know.
The better.
All right, folks, we've unpacked these tax adjustments, explored some of the bigger picture implications, and even highlighted some of the more interesting points that caught our attention. Hopefully, you're feeling a little more confident about navigating the 2025 tax season.
And a little bit more excited about it, too.
Maybe.
After all, taxes are just a puzzle to be solved. And with the right knowledge and strategy, you can come out ahead.
So true. So true knowledge is power. Everyone. Especially when it comes to your money.
Absolutely. And remember, this deep dive is just a starting point. The tax world is always changing. So stay informed and be ready to adapt.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So until our next deep dive, Happy strategizing, everyone, and
Mm.
may your 2025 tax season be as smooth as possible.
Here's to a smooth tax season.
Cheers to that.
One thing that really stood out to me is that the child tax credit, which was expanded during the pandemic, has gone back to its pre-pandemic level. It makes sense. It was always supposed to be temporary,
Mm-hmm.
but it was a big deal at the time. It really
Yeah.
helped a lot of families with children.
It was a lifeline for many.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And even though it was expected, it does make you think about the best ways to support families and address child poverty.